You'll never see me coming. That's because he's actually not even in the movie. Now let's talk about Iron Man 3, directed by Shane Black, also co-written by him. And this guy is, been around Hollywood for a long time. He's written some of the best action movies of all time, like Lethal Weapon. He directed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And I was like, that is a perfect match for this movie. Now the plot to Iron Man 3 is basically Tony Stark is having these anxiety attacks because of the events that happened in the Avengers where he saved the planet with the nuclear bomb. He took it up into a wormhole, then he fell out, then the Incredible Hulk jumped against a building and saved him. Now as far as Tony Stark's character getting these anxiety attacks after the events in New York, I don't really buy into it because this guy's already been through so many traumatic events in the previous films. He was held hostage in a cave. He fought Jeff Bridges in a big metal suit. He fought Mickey Rourke in a big metal suit. So continuing on with the plot, there's all these explosions going on across the nation, all these terrorist attacks, thought to be brought on by the Mandarin, who's played by Ben Kingsley, but like I said, we'll talk more about him in a little bit. Anyway, all these bombings going on across the nation aren't actually bombs, they're actually people internally combusting because they were actually enhanced with some kind of chemical that it basically turns you into the Wolverine. Like, you can reproduce body parts and regenerate, but if you're not careful, you just blow up. Now, the guy responsible for all this internal combusting is actually Guy Pearce, who plays Aldrich Killian in the movie. He's kind of an evil scientist, inventor guy, and him and Tony Stark are actually acquainted earlier on in the movie. Tony Stark's at this party trying to bang this really hot chick who's a botanist, who was also in the movie The Town with Ben Affleck. Very hot brunette chick. Anyway, Tony Stark basically gives this guy the cold shoulder early on in the movie and blows him off, and then this guy shows up 13 years later, kind of pissed off with a little bit of a vendetta. Now, the event that really connects Tony Stark into this storyline is at one of the bombings, Happy, aka Tony Stark's driver slash the director of the previous two films, Jon Favreau, is actually injured at one of these bombings and he ends up in the hospital, and it pisses Tony Stark off. So Tony Stark actually, makes a public announcement saying, "Hey Mandarin, here's where I live, come get me, here's my address." So the next day, Tony Stark gets his wish and there's helicopters waiting outside of his Malibu mansion. Very nice property on that coast right there. It's gotta be expensive. Anyway, all these helicopters start shooting missiles into his house. All these explosions start going off. The house starts to fall into the ocean. And one really cool scene happens at this moment. So as Pepper Potts and Tony Stark are both being blown back by this explosion, Tony Stark basically commands the suit to attach to Pepper Potts to protect her when she makes impact with the wall. And that scene right there gave me goosebumps. I thought that was really cool. Very, it just showed the guy's love for Pepper Potts because he's trying to protect her, and the suit really did come into play to save her life at that moment. And it was a really cool visually scene. It was all slow motion. So once Pepper Potts is out of danger and out of harm's way, she's actually outside of the house at this point. Tony Stark is actually still in the house, grabbing on. The house is falling. He actually falls into the ocean. The house is falling on him, and bits and pieces of the Iron Man suit connected to him. He's actually in the Iron Man suit at this point on the bottom of the ocean, but he's like running out of power. He can't quite get out of it, and the suit ends up saving his life. So let me jump to the end of the movie real quick. At the end of the movie, you come to find out that Iron Man has he has like 40 different Iron Man suits. They're all different. One's a big bulky one, one's a really cool yellow one. They all have like different functionalities and kind of a different, personality slash theme to them. And all 30 or 40 of these Iron Man suits were actually kept at Tony Stark's house that blew into the ocean. They were actually like located underground in this little cavern. Okay, let's jump back into the scene where Tony Stark's actually in the ocean with this house on top of him, and he's trying to get out of this situation. Now at the time, his power's running out of his suit. He can't do anything. He's about to die. My question is, why didn't he make one of those 30 or 40 suits come out of that little secret location at his house, which is right up there on top of the cliff, and come save him? Let's talk about the midpoint of this movie. This is where we find out the big twist of the movie. Now, by this point in the movie, Iron Man's only remaining suit, the only remaining suit we're actually left to believe that he has, even though there's 30 more sitting in a bunker at his mansion, this suit isn't functioning right. It won't power up. So Tony Stark, uses his skills. He goes to a local Home Depot. Technically, I don't know if it was a Home Depot, but it was a hardware store, and he makes this like little kind of, half-ass suit. He has like gloves and wires, and he takes Christmas bulbs and puts explosions in it. And I thought it was really cool. It took me back to that first Iron Man movie where he had to kind of improvise in that cavern, and it was really cool. I liked that scene because he goes to the Mandarin's mansion and he throws these Christmas bulbs at people. And everything about that made Tony Stark seem like a real badass because he wasn't heavily relying on this big armored suit. He was kind of, just using the little gadgets that he has, but he was just being Tony Stark the badass. Okay, so Tony Stark enters this mansion. He confronts the Mandarin, played by Ben Kingsley. By the way, Ben Kingsley, just a phenomenal actor. And even in the trailers, when he was doing the Mandarin voice, I was like, I really dig that. I was like, he's doing what Tom Hardy did with Bane's voice, Hello, Gotham, nice to meet you. And he kind of took his own take on it. He's like, ladies, gentlemen, sheep, cowards. I really dug the voice, that's all I'm saying. So he confronts this terrorist, the ruthless Mandarin, this badass Tony Stark's most ruthless villain of all time. This is Joker to Batman, Mandarin to Iron Man, basically. And the Mandarin ends up being this cowardly little small guy who actually has a drug addiction, and he's an ex-actor looking for work, and basically Guy Pearce hired him to portray this villain and this face of evil to take the heat off of what was really going on. Now that twist is basically what's dividing everybody on this movie from liking it or hating it. Now, did that really bother me? Well, it kind of did, just for a few reasons. Did we technically get the Mandarin in Iron Man 3? Yeah, Guy Pearce was the Mandarin. He was the villain. But we also had Ben Kingsley, who actually looked like the Mandarin, and it was built up to be him in all the trailers and promotional material. And Ben Kingsley, I thought, was doing what the Mandarin should be. Was a cool, different take on it, and I was really looking forward to it. So on the sense that they wasted Ben Kingsley being this big, badass Mandarin character, one of Tony Stark's most epic villains of all time, I was pretty much let down on it. Now, is Guy Pearce's character a good villain? Yeah, and does he have this power where Tony Stark basically almost can't beat him, where this guy breathes fire and liquefies and regenerates? He was a great foe for Iron Man. He actually almost seemed unbeatable until the end of the movie. Just a quick thought about the movie. Maybe what they could have done is kind of like what they did with The Dark Knight Rises. The Mandarin could have been the muscle. He could have been the badass villain who actually had a big fight with Iron Man, and then Guy Pearce's character could have been the brains behind the operation. Now let's talk about the tone of this movie. This movie had so many different tones going on, and overall I thought they came together pretty nicely. It had comedy, it had drama, it had action. And let me tell you about the comedy in this movie. The movie is co-written by Shane Black, who has some of the best funny, quippy one-liners. If you watch Lethal Weapon, the guy can introduce comedy into an action movie and make it funny. And some of the shit Tony Stark says in this movie was the most ballsy stuff I've ever heard his characters say. Over the last 3 movies, he said some witty one-liners here and there. One of my favorite scenes of this entire movie was, Tony Stark's character meets up with this little kid, and the kid's like sitting there, all sad and crying. He's like, my dad left, are you gonna leave me too? And Tony Stark's like, dads leave every day, kid. Don't be such a pussy. Now, before we talk about the huge climax and ending to this movie, I just wanted to make mention that Tony Stark in his Iron Man suit in this movie felt a little bit weak and underpowered. The suit was breakable. It always broke. It was always being beaten. And it wasn't this invincible godlike thing, and I kind of like that. But to some point, it kind of made things that happened in previous movies seem almost impossible. Okay, let's talk about the climax action ending to this movie. Now, finally, we got a good ending to an Iron Man movie. The other 2 movies had a 5-minute fight scene, especially the second movie. Here was the second movie's fight scene. You have Mickey Rourke in his suit. He takes 2 whips, throws it around their neck, and then they shoot him and fly off. That was the ending. But in this movie, you have this huge battle that takes place in this shipping freight yard. Guy Pearce's character is there. He has all these henchmen that, melt and turn into fire. And at this point, this is where we're introduced to all Tony Stark's 30 extra Iron Man suits that would have came in handy throughout the movie, but for some odd reason, he just never used them. Anyway, this huge battle ensues. There's all these Iron Man suits flying around, and this was visually one of the coolest things I've seen in a movie in a long time. Throughout the scene, you have Tony Stark. He's jumping from suit to suit. One's being destroyed after another. Basically, the suits in this movie are as dispensable as paper plates. Just one suit gets hit once, it blows up, and he jumps into another one. And some of the different suits are really cool to look at, and visually, there's one shot that had a lot of comedic effect where, you think it's gonna be this big epic grand moment, and the suit's flying in. It's his Mach 42 suit, and it just hits something and it shatters. Anyway, I'm gonna cut to the chase. At the end of the movie, basically Pepper Potts in the midpoint of the movie was injected with that stuff that heats you up and makes you invincible. So at the end of the movie, she falls into a fire. You kind of think she dies, even though she doesn't. And at the end of the movie, she basically saves Tony Stark's ass. She puts the Iron Man suit on and kills Guy Pearce with a missile. And I was like, Pepper Potts, you're a badass. Because I guess in the comic books, Pepper Potts a little bit more useful. She does things like that. She's a little bit more interactive in the fights. And they really brought that to life in this movie. So I was like, that was good. I was like, Gwyneth Paltrow, you look hot again, by the way, in your sports bra. so I really enjoyed that. Okay, let's cut to the very end of the movie. You know, Tony Stark cures Pepper Potts, you know, heating up issue. And the other big thing that they do at the end of this movie is Tony Stark, the whole character behind Tony Stark is he has those shards that are about to go into his heart, but he has the reactor core in his chest that keeps that from happening. At the end of the movie, they kind of do something that wraps it up a little bit too nicely and too quick that kind of goes against the grain a little bit. He finds out a way to take the shards out of his chest without killing himself, so he doesn't need the reactor anymore. By the way, if you think about it, when you take that huge reactor out of his chest, they're going to have to do a lot of plastic surgery to fill in that hole. Just think about that gaping hole that's going to be there. Anyway, I just kind of find that odd. After years and years of having a reactor in his chest, he all of a sudden now figured out how to not have to need it and take the shards out from killing him. You know, the guy who actually found a new element and created it to keep himself sustained never figured out a way to take metal shards out of his body until now. I don't know, something about that just felt a little too convenient for me. And then at the very end of the movie, you have Tony Stark basically doing this long narration about how he might be done being Iron Man. He doesn't need it anymore because he is Iron Man. And you know, I think that maybe they're just trying to save grace and make this the last Iron Man movie without saying this is, you know, indefinitely the last Iron Man movie, because Robert Downey Jr., you know, has spoken out saying that he might not do another Iron Man movie, and I think that they were trying to wrap this movie up as best they could without saying, yeah, it's over, that's it. You know, I think they're leaving it open just enough, but at the same time saying if this is the last one, it's kind of a good conclusion to wrap it up. So overall, Iron Man 3 could have been great. You know, there were so many things working for it, and if they just tweaked a few things, it could have been that phenomenal movie that I wanted it to be. So overall, I'm gonna give Iron Man a solid B. It's a good action movie, visually stunning to look at. It has moments of comedy that really work and pay off. So anyway, that's my take on Iron Man 3. Let me know what you guys thought about the movie down below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Was it just okay? Were you let down with the Mandarin? Anyway, yeah, tell me all your thoughts down below. And by the way, if you haven't checked out my last video, it's how to watch a movie. I'll put a link to that somewhere on here or down below. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.